Welcome back, everyone. This week I have 4 pages to show you. Yep, 4. I'll go through the compositions and share a nice trick of how to impress flowers and leaves in paper. So let's get started with the first pair. The left page have this little pocket with a couple of cards inside with leaf impressions. Here's a larger photo of them, and we'll start with making these. I learned this technique a couple of years back from Lydia. Her blog is called Understand Blue, and I thought it will be perfect for this journal. The idea is very simple. We use the pressure of the die cutting machine to impress a leaf or a flower into the paper. You can see I'm placing the card on one of the cutting plates, then position the leaf on the paper where I want it, place another piece of cardstock on top, and finish with the other plate. This will be our sandwich to pass through the die cutting machine. My regular die cutting machine is kind of huge, so I'm using the Sizzix Sidekick by Tim Holtz. It fits much better in the video, but also shows you that you can do that with any die cutting machine. Because the pressure squeezes the leaf, you get some liquid and the two cardstock pieces do tend to stick to each other, so peel them apart gently and voila! Isn't this gorgeous? And you get 2 beautiful impressions to use. Here's a close-up of the details. And the amazing thing is that it's actually even textured. It's really cool to see. I wanted the paper to look old, so I'm using Distress ink to stain it. I chose these inks because they're translucent, so they're not going to hide any of this beautiful pattern of the leaf that we got. And I used light colors and built the layers slowly until I reached the shade that I wanted. When you do this impression technique, take into account the different leaves and flowers will give you different results. Generally, leaves are easier to impress because the base of flowers have this thick part that is full of liquid and it tends to become a mess. I usually press the leaves and flowers in a book overnight before I put them in the die cutting machine, so they'll be drier and flatter already. With flowers, I sometimes wait even longer. The tricky part is doing the impression when the flower is dry enough not to make a mess, but not completely dry or the petals don't leave an impression. The only way to find what works is to try and see, and it's really fun to play. Okay, so let's go through the rest of the page now. I started with making the pocket. You might recognize the decorated edge from last week's video. It's the same die, only this time I used the edge on the pocket I made. And the pocket itself is just a triangle that I cut and folded 2 tabs so I can easily adhere at the bottom and the side of the page. I started with a pocket because it affects the composition, but you'll see in a bit that actually it complicated some things and I probably should have glued it down later. But I worked around it. I placed the leaf cards in the pocket to get the position of the first label right and then just put them aside and rolled with it. The main idea behind this week's pages is how our guy, the journal owner, reacted to the letter we found last week. Remember that wrinkly and torn page we found in the folder? And it's not really clear if it just got torn over time or maybe our guy got upset and tore it, because there were some upsetting comments in there, or at least it may have brought up some upsetting memories. But now he has to go on with his work, and that's the idea with these pages, that this isn't a diary, so he's not going to just sit down and write what he's feeling, but I wanted the pages following the letter to express his emotions in an indirect way. And right here, that's where I realized I shouldn't have glued the pocket yet, because I wanted some stamping to pick from under it. I keep saying how you should plan the layers and start with the bottom, but why take my own advice? Luckily, I could just slip the unmounted stamp into the pocket and stamp with my hand. And you might not get the best impression doing this because stamping blocks are what gives us this nice even press on the stamp. But as you may have noticed, I'm okay with uneven stamping in this project. It's actually what I want most of the time. So I purposely ink the stamps and unevenly and use generation stamps to get it. So I was definitely okay with what I'm getting here. The composition this week is more messy, and that's meant as an indirect expression of the journal owner's state of mind. Like things kept falling from his hands, We all have these days when something bothers you and we just can't seem to get anything right. So everything is a bit messier. I wrinkled some of the labels, for example, and just glued them down like that. And I also added a lot of random numbers stamped around. And these numbers are part of his work, the filing of the specimens. But at the moment, he just can't concentrate and everything is a little bit overwhelming. Finally, I added some stains to the page because if you keep dropping things, your notebook is bound to end up in the mud or have coffee spilled on it or something. So I wanted this page to be kind of extra stained. And these are water-reactive inks, so it's very easy to create stains by spritzing some water and dabbing it off. You just need to be more careful when you're doing it at this stage, so you won't get water all over the place. We move to the right page, and it continues the idea of expressing his inner turmoil in an indirect way. I always try to play with the meanings, things that can be about his work, but also about his emotions or thoughts. So this very large condemned can be about how he feels, but it can also just be a specimen that got damaged and he need to file it as condemned because it was already filed as collected and now it can't be used. So it can be purely about his work, and it's really just how you choose to read it. You can see that I really went to town with this baggie. It's torn and the label is damaged, and I really love how the wrinkles in the vellum come out white. It adds so much interest and texture. And in this page, I did take my advice and finish all the stamping first. So I added some numbers that continue the details from the left page, and then some partial stamping with a marker or with uneven inking. Which method I use sometimes depends on the size of the stamp. It's easier to get partial stamping with an ink pad when you use bigger stamps, and also with the text, I didn't really care exactly which part is stamped. It's just there to give interest in the idea of paperwork, and it's not really readable in the end. So I didn't need accurate inking. I glued the baggie over the condemned stamp, but made sure that it picks under and that when the baggie is lifted, you can see the word clearly. Then I just added a few ephemera and some inking to finish the page. The composition of this page continues the left one, so I didn't want it to be super busy, plus the staining on the background really fit with the theme, so I left it exposed as part of the double page composition. Moving to the second pair of pages, the idea of expressing his emotions becomes more direct. The main image on the left page was done with the impression technique I showed in the beginning, but this time I used flowers, lobelias to be exact. You can see in the close-up that there's only a little bit of blue from the petals and some messy spots where the juicier part were squashed and stained the paper. But hey, we're all about stains in this journal. The idea with this page is that it originally had a pressed flower in it, much like the tags we did last week. But here the protective page got torn and the flower itself is lost, so all we're left with is this impression of the flower. So I added a stained and torn piece of vellum to the page with very thin line of glue on the side, and because it's impossible to know what flower it was from the impression, I added a label on the vellum. The identity of the flower is important because floriography, the language of flowers, is something I'm using in this project, and in Victorian flower language, lobelia stands for malevolence and arrogance. When I first found that out, my first thought was, why? It's such a cute flower. My second thought was, I bet Tolkien knew. As for the why, apparently lobelia has a toxin that causes you to vomit, and it was used just for that in the past as a treatment for sickness. But well, even if it's a cure, vomiting is never fun, and lobelias got stuck with this bad association. The right page of this double spread showcases our guy's attempts to reply the letter we found last week. Maybe he figured that he has to deal with this before he can concentrate on his work again. So he started jotting things down in an empty page. And it's pretty clear from all the crossed lines that he needed to get some things out. I wrote this in a waterproof pen so I can ink and stain the page as much as I like. Some of it was done off camera, here it's more the finishing touches. I'm using a paper distresser for the edges. If you're not familiar, each groove in this tool has a little blade in it and you just run it on the edge of the page. You can use scissors for this, but this tool gives much faster and more consistent result, and it's also just safer. I made some creases in the page and inked them so it would look like they were there for a while. Basically, what's under the crease should be lighter because the fold protected it, so I held down the folded paper and inked around it. The final page will be folded, but this is an interactive piece and the reader is expected to open it and read the text. Here you can see the two pages together and how they connect. The overall composition is simple and brings out the details of the stains and the wrinkles. I'm not going to read out his writing attempts like I did with the letter, because part of the point is seeing what he crossed out and what he thought was okay. You can find a good close-up on my blog, the link is in the description. And I would love to hear what you think about this story and the project in general. Please click the subscribe button so you won't miss the next episode. We're definitely going deeper into the story now. Thanks for joining me and see you next time.